time that I will be saying this as an instructor in this particular bootcamp. This is my last class with you. I hope the other classes you enjoy and learn a lot of things from them, but also we are one class shy, at least from my part, to end this amazing journey. So in today's class will be like a fairly straightforward class. We will be talking about rendering and post-processing in general inside Unreal Engine. Let's take a look at what we will be seeing inside. This class will be separated in two main categories, will be post-processing and rendering. In the part of post-processing, we will take a look at the color flow that Epix does recommend us to follow. We will talk a little bit about the post-processing volume. We'll add a little bit more of information to our projects with the lookup tables. We will learn how they work inside the engine and how we can create our own. And then we will be talking a little bit about post-processing volume when it comes to exposure adjustment versus raw adjustment. Finally, we will talk a little bit about cinematic depth of field. Lastly, we will be talking about sequencer. And to be honest, we will take a look at the tool that we have been using so far, the Movie Scene Capture, but then we will take a jump forward, a leap to the Movie Render Queue, that is the most common tool that is being used to render cinematics inside the engine. Also, we'll talk a little bit about CVAR, so console variables, and then we can take a little bit of time to take a look at the GPU timeouts or TDR delays that you could find in the meantime. So yeah, as you can see, it's a very compressed class. It's not too long, but this is important because when you think that you have everything ready and done, when you hit that render button, sometimes start happening issues and you don't know where do they come from or you don't know why this is happening. So let's start with the post-processing control. We are talking about managing everything from one single section. So let's begin with this. The color control flow that Unreal Engine has for us. This is a recommendation from the Epic developer teams that tell us how we should be turning and playing a little bit with the colors if we need to. For example, one of the things that they do all the time is actually recommend to turn off auto exposure in the menu. It doesn't matter if this happens from the level itself of your or if you are doing so since the project setting. Let's take a look at this. What I will do, it's a very simple project. Let me see if we can create like an empty project right now. Let's take a look at this one from games because I do like to have like a playable character, and let's call it test color. So we have the test color here. It's loading up on its own. And then we will have like, what do we need to set up? For example, white balance, the tone mapping that we will be talking about a little bit of color correction, and we can do this in two different ways, per a global one or per shot, and then we can adjust the rest of the values, for example, shadows, mids, or hide. And in the end, we can talk a little bit about modifications inside the camera adjustment. So the first one is very important because so far we have been talking, for example, let me come here. Okay. If I come here, we can see, for example, that our project has a lot of information. We can see that everything it's being lit in a very um, com in a very equilibrated way. It's all very well lit. This is happening because inside the engine, there is happening a couple of things. For example, the auto exposure. If for some reason my directional light, we have it over here, was too bright, for example, 500, you can see that right now all the scene is too bright, but then it start to readjust to a value that is more manageable. This happens because inside the engine, we have a couple of tools that can handle this information. Let's put this one back to the value that it has before, and let's take a look at the post-processing volume inside the project. We are able to modify the exposure of our scene in two main ways. We can come here and set how we want to modify the exposure, and you can see that right now we don't have, for example, an auto exposure histogram. That is one way to handle the exposures inside the engine. If I do the same thing back again, for example, my directional light, here it is. Now, let's try to play a little bit with this post-processing volume. Our exposure histogram, and let's say, for example, how the compensation is being handled. In this particular project, it seems a little bit weird because I don't have like an auto exposure activated by default, but this should be because right now this one is enabled inside the project settings. If we come to the project settings, we can come here and say and search, for example, for the exposure, and you will say that we have our exposure histogram, and then we can take a look at the bias that this histogram is applying to our project. Also, this is very interesting because right now, what it's doing, it's actually metering the information of this scene using this post-processing volume. Okay, this is great. If I get rid of this post-processing volume, for example, you can see that right now it just reorganized the lighting itself. This is because although inside the project you are given some information, I mean in the project settings, you're saying, I want to use auto exposure, you can override that information using something called post-processing volume. We have talked about this a little bit during the classes, but so far we will be talking in detail about this particular actor. If we, let me create, for example, an extent of this one, and we modify it again, for example, my exposure, we can play and you can see how this scene is getting darker or brighter, depending on the information that I'm giving to it here. So it's important to understand when I want to modify my exposure and which element is doing so, because otherwise this could cause a lot of troubles. Once you have all the information about how you want to set up your project, for example, out exposure, your white balance or your temperature inside your project, you can do this as well from here. For example, this post-processing volume already has the information on how should be modified our projects. For example, if I come down here and search, for example, for the white balance, you will see that we have right now three aspects. We have temperature type, white balance or color temperature, and we can make it colder if we lower the number. And of course, we can make it warmer if we increase the value um, of this element. Also, what you could do is actually add a little bit of tint to your scene if you need to add, for example, a little bit of magenta or green to your project. All of these are small slides that we have access primarily from here, from the post-processing volume, and this is why I was saying this is important to use. So the next step that we have is play a little bit with the film, tone mapper, color correction, and then shadow, midst, and high. Let's take a look at that. So far, we have been playing a little bit with the information inside the engine, but this information that we add, it's like preset already. For example, when we talk about the textures, we talk about the lights and everything else. Yeah, of course, we can modify some of these elements, but the final look is a little bit on the lucky side. You start playing or adding elements, and in the end, you hope that everything works cohesively inside the engine. But that's not always the case. Inside here, we have access to a lot of elements. For example, we have access to modify the color, shadows, midtone, highlights, and also we can add a couple of effects additional to the engine. So let's take a look at those. In this particular case, what I will do is open a small project that you may have already used before. It's our entropy project. And inside here, I want to take a look at everything that is created right here. So I'll close this one. And now I want to take a look at this post-processing volume. As you can see, I don't have one added to my scene. This is not the most um, like difficult thing to do. You can finish a whole project without post-processing volume. This is not a recommendation that I will give. Actually, for me, this is one of my four um, main actors into a project because I tend to use the post-processing volume to do a lot of things. So let's begin adding one. Let's go here, take a quick search to the post-processing volume, and I want to zero it out. If you can, maybe you can see it here. We have a small cube. So far, this cube, it's only affecting whatever is inside this cube. What I want to do is actually make it infinite. So in this case, we need to search a parameter called infinite extend unbound. So after I activate this one, all the modifications that I do in this post-processing volume will affect the whole project. For example, if we take a look at the details that we have here, you will see that we have lens, mobile depth of field, bloom, exposure, CA, dirt mask, cameras, blah, 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 blah. We have a lot of effects to work here. So, for example, we talked 1 minute ago about the temperature. We can set the temperature of our project and then play and set how we want to achieve the result that we need for this particular project. This is cool because right now I have access not only to the temperature of the project, but also I do have access to all the globals, sorry, to all the global information. Let me see where it is back over. Yeah, to all the information inside the modification globally or even individually of this color. And this is cool because what I can do is, for example, take a look at the saturation as a global parameter, and then I can add a lot of saturation to the whole project. And now you can see that all my project is quite saturated in color. Of course, this is a huge exaggeration from my part, but you can see that it applies to this entire scene. So all that I can see that is inside the global will modify the entire image that is being displayed in our scene. If I come a little bit down, for example, if I modify shadows, I can play For example, let's take a look at two elements that will be fairly distinct. The contrast in the global category, if we play a little bit with this contrast, we can see how our image become a little bit bleach out. It start to whitening a little bit, or it can go darker as we move. This could be an interesting aspect or an interesting effect sometimes, but when we do know where to apply it, for example, this contrast right here is way too over exaggerated. Although I believe this image needs a little bit more of information. So these shadows needs to be a little bit more, they need a little bit more punch. So instead of modifying all the contrast in this project, what I could do is actually seek out the contrast in the shadows, for example, that are the darker tones of the image, and then I can play a little bit with this one. You can see, for example, the greens stays almost the same. If you can see, for example, the metallized part of this robot stays almost the same. But what modifies is the darkest or the shadowest part of this image. You can play a little bit with this, doing all that you need. For example, if I want the brightest part to become a little bit more, let's give it to the high tones, the highlights. Let's give it a little bit more of gain, for example, so they can take a little bit more protagonism inside the project. Or no, maybe I want to read a little bit better the information inside the chest of my character. I have this teeny tiny um, part of the contribution of the color inside my scene. Obviously, what I'm doing right now is not a full colorimetry study of my scene. This is not like 100%. This is amazing to develop, for example, some sort of, if we're talking about look development, this will be great, but this is not the, for me at least, the most correct way to do so. My recommendation on this case is if you come down here, you can take a look at the SM color checker. Let me see if we have it available. No, we don't. So let's take a look. Let's go to settings. And then inside here, you will see that we have show C++ classes, developer content, engine content, and plugin content. What I can do is actually add all the information. And in the meantime, while you are activating or deactivating things, you will see that you have more or less folders to you. I don't want to deal with the developer contents because I don't need it. But right now, is if I do look at a SM color here in the engine, I'm sorry, you will see that we have an asset called SM Color Calibrator. Yeah, this one over here. So this is very important to use because for those who knows what this is a Macbeth. And with a Macbeth, what we could do is a couple of things. We can understand, for example, the white balance of our scene. We can set, for example, a register of a colorimetry of an image and then adapt to whatever camera we are using. And then we can work with this as we need it. So to use this one, what you could do is actually, if you have it here inside the engine, what I would do is actually, I always take this one, I'll open, and then I'll drag and drop and use it somewhere around here. If you have, for example, some software that do works with colorimetry, what you could do is actually you can extract the information from this asset, and afterwards, what we could do is actually modify the information of the global colorimetry of the image via LUT or legacy LUT, for example, or what you could do is actually use or create like a 3D LUT so we can have like a final pixel detail of this. But this is a cool way to understand how the colors looks and if the entire scene looks as we need. So inside this, we will find out that Unreal Engine already comes with a post-processing color flow that is fairly accurate to what we understand inside the academy. And this is because Unreal uses ACES by default. And we can see it apply inside the film toner mapper properties that is added to our post-processing volume. This may be a little bit hard to see at first glance, but when you go to the film category inside the post-processing volume, you will see a couple of elements. For example, you will see the slope, toe, shoulder, black clip, and white clip. What it does, it's actually draw like a nest shape inside the, this is the color gamut inside the image, and it already gives us like a very natural way to conceive or understand the image. This is based in, of course, ACES, and that is the, we're fine. That was close. Is and because this is actually academic color encoding system that is being used in a lot of filming and TV industry. So let's take a look at where this is and what it's doing. If we take a look back at our project and then search our post-processing volume, we will see that we have a film category. So far, this one already has these settings. Oh, let me come back a little bit so we can have our image as it was a little bit earlier. Yeah. And you will see that right now we have all of this information. Right now we can see film and we can see all the information that we said before. Right now we have this low that is actually saying how is being read the graph in this, in which way. The toe, we can see exactly how it's behaving in the beginning and in the end. We can see in the toe and the shoulder, and we already have where is the black clip and the white clip inside the image. We talked earlier that inside linear content creation, we don't have the perfect. For example, we don't have perfect whites and we don't have perfect black. When we talk about colorimetry inside the industry, we do have perfect blacks. And this is actually one of the holy grails of OLED indeed, because what they are trying to replicate is the most accurate contrast that we can see, or in this case, they are trying to um, project the lack of light. So yeah, this is very interesting to see because unlike what we talked before, we need to understand how the black clip is, how dark will get our image or how bright can get our image. We can start playing and modifying with the information of this. And what we could do is actually understand how is being modified this slope. So in this time, in this case, while I am moving it a little bit lower, if you remember the S shape, what I'm doing is actually leaning it to a more horizontal aspect. And what we will get with this is actually make it a little bit wider because our toe is actually um, higher than the value of the slope. We can do this the other way around. We can play with this and make it darker and more contrast. This will give me like the most rich color that we can have inside the engine, but also, even though my slope is at the highest as top, actually we can still playing a little bit to refine. You can see like I'm trying to add a little bit more depth to these shadows by playing with the shoulder. If we go to play with the toe, we can make it a little bit brighter in the shadows, but we still have these three parameters that are fairly easy to understand. And also, these parameters that you have here, if you understand where they are and what they do, you can drag and drop, for example, any node inside DaVinci, Nuke, After Effects, or any editing program, and you can achieve the exact same result that you have inside Unreal outside. And this is one of the things that I do like to point out right now is Unreal has amazing post-processing effects. Actually, we will take a look at a couple of those in a minute, but remember, this is a 3D and animation package software. All of these effects, we can deal with them after the fact that we render the image. Because if we render a linear content image, we're able to modify it after the fact. But if we make the wrong choice modifying this image inside here and then we re-render out, we can find issues trying to remodify to another way. So yeah, please be careful with this particular aspect as well. Just to complement this a little bit more, one of the things that is always like a fairly, this is like a small discussion that we have all the time is actually, it doesn't matter how good your computer is in the end, how many FPS you can render, how good your RAM is, how fast is your storage, because everything that we are doing right now, we need to visualize it in one place. Normally, it's our monitor, but it's very difficult to validate color information if this asset, this monitor that we are talking about, is not the same across different pipelines. For example, if right now I do work in this project and then I submit it to review in the studio, for example, I will get issues because the way that I am being shown these images here is completely different of what I could expect from a 10 bit monitor. The difference seems to be silly. These monitors are 8 bits, but a 10 bits monitor have a huge wide range. And this is one of the things that we need to understand because right now we are accustomed to use sRGB or the Rec 709, that is the most standard common standard format in the industry. Adobe use it as a native format, but when we try to compare the range of color that we have inside Rec 709 versus ACES, it's huge. We have a big difference in the dynamic range of the image. And with that information, we can color grade this a lot better. Also, we can play a lot with the information, for example, inside exposure of the image, or also we can control the grain of the image. Something that right now is not an issue for us because we are dealing with a CG image that produces no noise at all, unless we wanted to. So, but yeah, so far it doesn't. Please take a look at the monitor that we're working with. And I do understand this is like a pricey buy because you don't think this is too important at first, but yeah, being able to control the color of your image is amazing. What I do, and I do this at home, it's actually, I do use my phone, believe it or not. For example, my iPad also does this fairly well. They have like a strong color adjustment or or handling the information of color inside the images. So to validate my images before send it to the studio or anything else, I try to take a look on how this is being shown in my phone or iPad before I can send it. Also, there's like a couple of free programs that allow us to use these elements as external screens. So yeah, it's a small sheet that I do. It's not perfect, but it works a lot better than my main screen. So this is something that is worth to notice. Also, let's take a look a little bit of what happened when I want to use some effects, for example, for VR. The post-processing volume is actually fairly important and also can break your project. I'm going to be honest. Sometimes we have been sent projects to us that are broken, and a couple of them can be solved by just modifying the post-processing volume or just deleting these PPVs. And this is because inside the post-processing volume, we don't have only access to modify the color of the scene. We have information on what is being rendered inside the project. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But when we talk about VR, we are talking about we need the most performance possible, and we are trying to avoid weird effects. Important. This is important. I'm not tired to say this. Please, let's take a look at this. When we talk about VR, we don't need a screen space ambient occlusion. If we don't need it, we don't use it. If we need it, please let's keep it at least in low. Try not to use the screen space ambient occlusion too much. Actually, this has like a small heating performance, but actually, when you see this in VR, you can get nauseated uh, in the long run. So let's keep it below the bloom or turn it off completely, and this can happen as well with the screen space reflections inside the engine. Also, please let's turn off lens flares and motion blur. Believe it or not, we have access to all of this inside the post-processing volume. Also, everything that has to say with SS, it means a screen space, and the screen space effects are like a big no for VR. I know this doesn't apply to our specific project right now, but it's important to keep that in mind if by some reason you do render like a 3D version of your project. Okay, so I will jump back to the engine. Let's go back here. And what we have been saying is, well, actually, this is by default. I'm not going to get in here. And you can see that inside the post-processing volume, we have information, not only, let me put this pause a little bit more, let me compress this one, but I want you to see all the information that we have available. And you can see that we have all the information for color grading, camera, but we also have different kinds of effects available in here. The most common ones are, for example, bloom. If I come here and search for bloom, you will see that we right now have bloom. Let me see where is my directional light right here. Directional light, and let's bring up a little bit of the sun. Where are you? There you are. So in my post-processing volume, you can see that right now I have like a bloom, and this one has like a method of being rendered, and right now set standard. If I come here and set from standard to convolution, you will see that, well, it seems to be like nothing really happens. This is because right now I am being obstructed by the clouds and everything else. But over here, what we could do is actually play with information of the convolution inside this element. So I can play with the convolution scale that says when we want this to happen, and what, if not, what I can do is actually go to the other scene. I don't want to break out this scene. I want to use it to render, but we can play a little bit more with when we want this to boost. Let's modify a couple of things here. Let's take the clouds and the exponential height of fog. Okay, so let's activate this convolution here. And now we can see how much we want this effect to take place. This looks fairly more natural to what our sees, to our eyes will see once we get to a bright element. This is natural to say it in a manner. Also, this effect can be mixed up with the, let me see, the directional light with the size of this element. If I come to the source angle and I can make it a lot bigger, you can see that right now this effect is like breaking up my project. This is as usual. Please keep it and keep it simple because otherwise you can achieve these weird results. Let's get back to the post processing volume and take a look at the bloom. Here it is. So you can play with how much you want this effect to be, modifying your project. And you can see that when it encounters, for example, the leaves, it also adds a little bit of bloom going through this image. One of the things that we need to understand is this is a fairly complex process. When you do convolution effects over the engine, let me put this a little bit more near. Okay, something like this. I like it a little bit more. Now I can see like the energy coming in and out when it's being projected from this surface. One of the things that I want to said is these effects, by silly that they are, they takes a lot of computational uh, power. So what I recommend you to do is this effect, this post-processing effects that we are playing with right now, I'll try to keep it deactivated until the very end. Once I have my project like this is how I want this to look, then I start playing with these effects because they are distracting. This is the main issue that I encounter. In a minute, we will talk about exposure, and you will see that we have an issue with that. But also, important is to understand, for example, if your project doesn't look as you want without the effects won't fix a project. So yeah, that's also that can be distracted. I don't know if you remember what it was Star Trek, the reboot that they did with Chris Pine. Yeah, this new Zachary Quinto, yeah, Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto in the new Star Trek, they have like this crazy lens flare everywhere. So yeah, it's cool, but it's not the most amazing thing to see because it's distracting. Let's take a look now that now that we talk about this to lens flare. That's the next one. Actually, the lens flare, as you can see, it was like one, but even though it is in one, right now it's not doing anything. Well, actually, that is because when you have this deactivate, you are not using the effect. Right now, we are. And this is cool because we can play with how strong we want this effect to be. We can play with the color of this deformation. And remember that the lens flare is no more than the diffraction of the light when it hits sideways the lens of the camera. But what you could do is actually let's play and add it like a small reddish tint or a little bit of bluish, and you can start like dialing this to make your own um, lens flare. The other thing that we could do is actually we can play with how big we want this bokeh to start taking shape. And also you can animate that. It's a very subtle way to add a little bit more information to our scene. And also we can add a threshold. The threshold that what it will do is actually add like a small well, it's actually a threshold. It will tell me when we want this effect to take a shape. For example, if we start to dialing this one a little bit, let's see if something like, oh, in this case, not taken too much information, maybe because this intensity is way too low, and this threshold should be fairly low as well. Let me see. Yeah, this is way too small to see this threshold applied here. And the other thing that you could do is actually you can add like a shape um, to this bokeh, and you can add whatever shape you need. So this is fairly interesting. Let's open the good old Paint and set, for example, what you want to do is, okay, I want to create like, this would be greater if I make, for example, like a square image. This is me being, let me see if I could, I don't know how to paint in Paint. I can't believe this. So let's take a
pencil here.
yeah, but actually I wanted to use this.
Maybe it's small.
Here it is. For example, if we go down here and we said like, I want this, let's put this into the downloads in Happy Face, download folder. And what I could do is actually open, and let's go to my content folder. Let's turn off this, and let's import here into the downloads this Happy Face. So right now, let's save it. Ooh, I don't want to save the project. Important. And right now, if I do have this selected, I can add it here. And now all and what I could see is actually my happy face drawn here in the lens flare of the image. Of course, it's a silly effect, but you can make it however you need. So please keep that in mind, okay? Yeah, and I agree. This one was a little bit better. This like weird turtle here. Okay, we saw bloom, lens flare, they work pretty easily, but let's take a look at the other ones. For example, we also have the information about chromatic aberration. The chromatic aberration, it has to be, again, with the lens of the image, but what happens is the information of the tritone that compose the film start to open. This happens a lot in the corners of the images. So let's take a look at this over here, for example. And then what I want to do is actually play with intensity. So far, you can see that from inside the image out, we can start see how we break. And this is a very good example. This happens a lot when you have these highly contrasted background and foreground elements. And we can see how this breaks into green, red, and blue channels. Also, you can start playing with the offset saying, okay, I don't want the effect taking place in the center of the image. And you can see like how it's starting to modify. And now I have this effect only on the corners of this image. Again, I'm trying to do this very heavy into the image so you can see it in your screen, but please try to be as subtle as you can. I know that sometimes these effects are cool to look, but please don't overdo it. Also, this was very common in the analog era because some of the cheap lenses for film give this Super 80 look to the projects. And I know today it's like a very uh, happy accident to find out. So the other thing, the other effect that we have that it's quite similar um, to the lens flare is actually this dirt mask. The dirt mask, what it does, it's actually when the light reflects on top of the lens. Back again, let me see if I can find like a dirty mask, for example. Let me see. Yeah, this is not what I was looking for. Yeah, this one. Okay. Excellent. Let's dock this one here. Yeah. And now over here, back again, let's try to add a texture. We have this one. Let's rename it dirty. Okay. So now I will add it here to this image. Also, this is not the most amazing image. I'll show it to you in a minute, but yeah, we have this dirty mask. So far, it's not happening anything in the scene because I haven't added yet to my image. But what it what it does actually, I'll take out the bloom and lens flare so we can see it without any issue. Okay. The dirty, here it is. So the dirty mask, what it will do, this is not the most amazing example because the tones are very similar. What it will do is let's go to the bloom once again. Let's go to the standard and add a little bit of bloom. Yeah, is when this finds like something hitting directly on top of my image, what you can see is that the overexposed side of the image get this dirt effect on my text on my image instead of having maybe this one can work a little bit better. Let me see if I can. Okay. Yeah. Now you can see that this camera is like dirty on top of, and what I could do is actually invert because that would be the right effect. And when the light hit it, it starts to reveal what is underneath or over it in this case. So that's a pretty neat effect to do as well. Maybe this is far too too intense, but something like this, and you can see that when the light hits the lenses, we can see this effect, like modifying the look of your camera. So please take a look at that. Also, this image is not right. What I could do is actually invert this one. But the other thing that you could do in this case is actually modify a little bit the color. So you can add like this grunge color to this element as well, instead of being like a natural white on top of it and make this wash out look to the scene. As far for the other effects, we have one that it's called grain. That is actually one of the most, to be honest, this is one of the most requested one from everybody that says, okay, I want to see grain into my image. Like this was quite weird, but okay, we have it. Inside here, we have a grain intensity. I don't know if you're able to see it in the Zoom. I may understand that you may not be able to do so, but what it's doing, it's actually giving me like a small grain issue inside the image. We can play where we want it, For example, you want it only on the gray tones, on the shadows, on the highlights, and how big you want this to be. For example, you can make the grain a lot bigger. I don't know if you can see it right now on the screen, but you can play a little bit with that. Maybe I don't want the effects happening in the midtones or in the highlights, for example. And what I could do is actually keeping it only, let's keep it a little bit here. So what this will do is actually give me like this grain only, and I can see it exactly inside the most dark part of the image. And this is because I'm telling the engine where, in which part I want this effect being happen. So be careful. Also, you can give it like a grain texture to the image. This is cool if you, that would be silly, but if you have like a pattern or a specific pattern of noise that you need to affect your image, you can do this in here. So this is as far as the effects that we have available. We talk about bloom, exposure, CA, direct mask, and now we can see that we have other kind of effects. For example, we have depth of field that it's weird, and it's weird because why do I need to have, for example, a depth of field in here? Well, this is because before the post-processing volume was considered like a camera itself, and they are not wrong at all, because if you take a look at the other options that we have available, for example, let's close this one, you will see that we have, let me see if I can find the camera, we have all the information that is related to a camera inside the post-processing volume. This doesn't mean that you have to spend all the time like diagnosing and using the post-processing volume as a camera, but it's good to know that you can make this relationship between a camera and the post-processing volume. The best example that I could give about this is the post-processing volume is how you perceive the scene, how you want it to look, and then when you add the cameras is how you want to modify those parameters to be as cinematic as you want. This is the best example that I could give in that regard. Also, the post-processing volume, and let's take a look back at our presentation, is, oh, look, I was going to skip this part non-intentionally. But yeah, what is ALUT? Actually, ALUT is being simple, a set of instructions for remapping the pixel values inside Unreal Engine or inside the post-processing volume. Of course, we have ALUT space. If we come down here, for example, and we take a look at, I'll get rid of this post-processing volume and I'll create a new one. And then I want to create a new one. Remember, if you create a new post-processing volume, this what you need to do is actually make it infinite so it affects everything. You will see that we have a LUT. This is an LUT case lookup table at the end. So I could activate this, but right now I don't have anything. And the weird thing is that I cannot add any image to my LUT. Okay, yeah, it will do something, but it's something very weird, to be honest. What I can do to create this one looks great, to be honest. I don't know, it's weird, but it can work. Yeah, take a look at that. It can work. But yeah, so how can we use like a proper LUT inside Unreal Engine? Well, to do this, downloads, and now we can see a look at this. If you can see this, what it's doing, it's actually reading a small information from each pixel that we have here available. So we have all the range of images of colors that can sample our screen, or in this case, Unreal Engine, and we can add a modification on top of it. So uh, okay, excellent. So what I will do is actually open this one in Photoshop. I'll click and drag. It will ask me for the color space available here. And now we have Photoshop. This new Photoshop has too many things right now, but I can see all the modifications. So how these modifications are being added? Well, let's take a look at our project. This is my image, and what I want to do is actually apply modifications to my image itself, because this is how I can know I like this modification. So let's do something. We can do this in two different ways. We can come here and open, create a high resolution screenshot, and then the engine will ask me, okay, I can take a print of this and create a new image. This is one way, and it works perfectly. But also we have a console bar command that says something like high res shot. Here it is. No, 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 not you. High res shot. And then I can type out exactly the resolution that I need. For example, 1920 by 1080, if I wanted in that aspect ratio. So when I open this, you can see that my two images looks different. The first one takes a look at what is being displayed on the screen, but the second one, what it does is actually take this resolution that I gave to the engine to create this particular image. Either way will work just fine. So I'll open this one in here. I don't want to modify the color space. And now what I want to do is actually modify this a little bit. The way that we will do this is adding some layer adjustment. For example, I'll play a little bit with this. I'll try to create like this, the saturated reddish image, and I'll make it a little bit more dark to create these old type footage. And maybe if we come here and create, for example, a little bit of levels, I can make it a little bit darker here and a little bit brighter here. So here, I like it. So we are starting to modify. We can go as aggressive as we want. Let's take an example of this. We could come to adjustment once again and set, for example, I want to create, I believe we already have some sort of flutes here. We can go to bleach bypass. Well, this one is quite too aggressive. There is one that I do like a lot. For example, this one, I do like this aspect for my image. What I'm doing actually is modifying inside Photoshop and adding layers on top of my image, because these modifications, these elements, I want to copy with Control C from my original image, and I want to add it here on top of my LUT. You can see how my LUT changes when I add all these modifications. So I will create this one and I'll call it save as, and this part is important, to be honest. You want to make sure this is a 16-bit by channel modification. And then we want to save this. Let's export as a PNG. Okay, you can see PNG. This is the right resolution. PNG. If you don't need it, you don't want the alpha channel. Actually, in this case, you won't be able to need it. And yeah, it seems to be working perfect. So let's export this one. I'll call it LOT1, so we can know this is the first one that we created. And now I want to come here and make a new one. won't take me too much time. Actually, I'll go the easy route and go to create a new dot. And now let's to believe is one of these. Oh, I do love this one. But yeah, let's go with something like this one, for example. I'm a little bit worried about this one because it's too heavy on the darks, but yeah, it will work as a good example. So I'll copy this effect, I'll substitute this one for this one, and now let's export this one again. Let's export. This seems to be great. And now export. This one will be LOT2. I have two LUTs inside the engine. Let's jump back. And right now, what I want to do is import the two images that we added. So import, let's select the two images that we modified before. And you may think that we are already done. No, if I take this and I'll add this one here, you will see that it start modifying the whole image, but it doesn't look at all as what we saw earlier. So what is going on? Well, in this case, these images needs a little bit of configuration. So let's open the texture, double click, and we need to make two modifications. From here where it says MIP Gen settings, we want to change it. We want to avoid this image to have MIP maps. This is important because we don't want Unreal, for example, breaking in half the resolution of this texture, because breaking it in half will break our palette in 4 less colors that we need. So this is important. The next one is the texture group. Right now, it says world, but we know that this texture is actually a color lookup table. So we change it, we save it, and now we can take a look at how our texture looks. This looks a little bit more similar to what we have before. No, this one, no, this one. This one should look like the one that we have before. Okay, for this one works, we need to do the exact same work here with this one. MIP Gen settings, let's change it from here to no MIP maps, right? And then in the texture group, we want to set color lookup table. Great. Let's save it. We don't see any change in the scene, obviously, because we haven't added here. And now this is exactly what I had in Photoshop. If I come back here and I'll take a look at my image, this is almost what I have in Photoshop. So it's a very easy way to prototype and modify the look of my image fairly easy. Okay, I don't know if we have any questions on what I have been saying so far. I don't want to save this. Maybe I want to cancel because I want to use Photoshop in a bit. That great. So the next point that we have about this, oh, this is a small tutorial. It's very cherry pick comments to how you need to do this. But one of the things that I want to add on top of this is one effect that is cinematic. This should be used only, and this is like a game-centric effect, and this is how they call it, because this works perfect to an image that is being displayed on the screen. It's fairly cheap because what it's doing is applying a LUT to the image, but you won't have information about the HDR of the image. When you have like a 10-bit image, you will lose a lot of information. In that case, the recommendation is that you create a 3D LUT and then modify the output via a Nuke, for example. OpenColor.io, to be honest, I don't have enough time to talk a little bit about this, but Unreal Engine actually offers built-in support for using Okio to convert this color into a linear media by using many methods. And for those who are, for example, a little bit familiarized with the art, you will know that linear content is fairly um, important for us because what we get out of the engine it's like a lot of information, even though it looks awful. But this is why we have and later on adjustment of the exposure and tuning mapping inside the pipeline. Okio does something very similar. It takes the raw information of the cinematics, and then you're able to modify it outside the engine, but it comes enabled by default. Let's take a jump back to what we said earlier in the talk. We talk a little bit about post-processing volume, adjustment, exposure versus raw. This will link a couple of things that we mentioned before, but right now, when we see this image, we know that this post-processing volume uses, for example, a value, this difference value of exposure that can vary according to the scene. And this is normal. When you are inside an space, you know that the parameters that you will be using for your camera will be different than the ones that you will use for an exterior shot. Sometimes this is hard to understand. Also, it's hard to know if my lighting is correct. This happens to everyone, and this is important. And this will link, for example, to the monitor conversation that we have earlier. Let's take a look at something. Inside the engine, right here, we have this information already built in. We know that we have a lighting. Let's open the exponential height and fog and let's take a look at our project. So we have inside Unreal Engine one option to visualize, and actually we can take a look, I'm sorry, we can take a look at the HDRI adaptation of the scene, this one here. If I click it, you will see that right now I do have a little helper down here. So this one, actually what it says is actually how it's being exposing my image. Also, it gives me like a readout of the information of what is the most lighted point in the scene in my screen right now. Right now, I can see like this guy is emitting like 002 point luxes. And actually we have it down in nits as well. That is exactly the same value, but over pi, if I'm not mistaken. But you can see like all of this information here. Also, you can see these three elements moving from one side to the other. What are those? Well, this one is actually what it's the scene, how should be the lighting in the scene. And as you can see that right now, my scene, it's like, okay, it looks like it's bright, but let's take a look at that. Post-processing volume, exposure. Okay, excellent. And I want to make this a little bit bigger so we can see it. Okay. Metering mode. We have inside Unreal three types of metering modes. We have the auto exposure that uses like a 16-bit bus to read the lighting in the scene. We have the basic one that is the legacy one that we have. It uses 8-bit to read it, or we can have like a manual one. These are the two most uses. I use the manual one for a very simple reason, because in most of the cases, I want the exposure to be consistent. So right now we have the exposure of the scene. We have where is my exposure right now, and we have where is right now being read. This is weird to understand right now because I am too far away from where I need to be. This happens when you work in manual, because the auto exposure, what it does is actually try to add the information to the main value to adjust to shorten this distance. So when you play with the exposure compensation, you can see that you are able to move wherever you need. For example, if I move the white one to here, I'm close to what it should be like a perfect lit image. Yeah, it looks great in this case. What I did is actually compensate a little bit more of what I need to, and now they look fairly similar. Even though if my exposure, my exposure value it's a little bit lower than right now I am reading. This is one of the things that you need to familiarize a little bit. What happens when I go manual? You can see that in manual, I go manual 000. Right now, I am way too far from the line. I'll try to go a little bit higher, maybe 2. And you can see that right now, I don't know if I write 2. Yeah, 2. Right now, you can see that I move from 991 to 791 because I am moving towards that space. If I go directly, for example, 5, you can see that right now I am starting to see things, but I am moving toward the element. If I go, for example, 9.1 directly, oh, we're fairly close. But remember, earlier what we have is the value, and in top we add 1 to compensate that. And this is exactly what I need to do here, 10.1. And we're now exactly where we were before. The main difference between auto exposure is Unreal is dealing with most of the calculations, and manual exposure is that we need to enter the EV values that we consider correct for this exterior project. And for example, for an exterior project, 10 or 12 should be right. Well, maybe 12 is way too much. That should be pretty neat to what we are working with. Actually, if you take a look at what we brought here inside the scene, you can see like home interiors, 5 or 7, office space, 7 or 8, outdoor sunny, 11 to 15. It's not way too different what we have early on, but this is one of the things that can work when you're working with non-physical exposure values, okay? And I want to do this as a small explanation because this can drive in too many questions right now. And is this simple thing. I will take all these elements and I will modify only one. We know that this light is 10 luxes, but we talk that the sun physically have, for example, an average of 75,000. This is what at least the guys at Epic said. And now you can see that I am like 10 times over the value. So let's go back to my post-processing volume. Let's take a look at the exposure. And if I come from 10 to -3, for example, you'll see that I'm almost there, almost. I know this because I have been working with this like too many times already, too many years, I'm sorry, but this exposure compensation should be the result of the camera shutter speed, the aperture of the lens, and of course, the ISO of your project. Also, this is like the EV value. This is the compensation value for the Sony 180 rule that we have normally. So yeah, the information of raw versus non physically lightened scenes shouldn't be like a huge issue, but you should know what you are doing or what you are dealing with to avoid weird artifacts. These can happen. For example, weird artifact that could happen. You will see that the heart is not emitting light, for example. Well, I need to keep that in mind if I am going to use a cinematic because right now it won't do anything. Don't get too stressed with this. Only try to use this tool to visualize if your lighting is correct or at least close to be correct. It's hard to have like a correct lighting because as soon as you move, you can see like the blue line dancing all over the place. So don't go that route. That the perfect lighting is this one. Try to follow as you need. You can modify this shot by shot if you need to. So please be careful with that. I'll go back to 10 as we were before. And my directional light, I will put it back in 10. If I'm not wrong, this should be looking, well, let's move it. Sometimes Lumen take a little bit of time to adjust everything back to where it should be. Okay, so we are right now in a perfect spot. Now in the depth of field. Actually, about the depth of field, I want to talk a little bit because, to be honest, you should understand this better than what I can. But sometimes it's hard to see what we are focusing inside the engine. It's hard. I won't lie to you. This is like one of the most common situations that we have, even after we create the whole cinematic. So let's take a look at something. Here, where we saw, for example, these visualize options that we have here, we take a look at this one that says HDRI adaptation. I'll turn this one off because what I want to use is this one that says depth of field layers. When I do this, you will notice that so far it's nothing happening here. Of course, it's nothing happening because I am like floating around in the scene and I'm not looking at anything. So let's go back to the sequencer. I believe like I break something in the way because I believe the post-processing, the original post-processing volume had some effects added to it. And now if you can see this scene, you will see that we have like this weird colored element. What is this? Well, let's go to like a close shot here. Not this one, for example. What does this mean? Okay, we have three colors. All that is blue is far away, all that is in black is what is being focused, and all that is green is the elements that are in the foreground. So what I will try to achieve is to make the object of interest always in black. Let's take a look on how can I rate this. For example, let's take this shot as an example. I'll come a little bit close here. This one, you can see that is not focusing at anything. You can see the focal distance is too far away. If I take a look at this image, it doesn't look bad, but if I come a little bit closer, I can see that this element is a little bit out of focus. Obviously, if we come to this shot itself and we take a look at the camera, you can see that this has like a huge aperture. It's 2.8. And also, if we take a look at the focal length of the camera, the lenses that we have is a 3 millimeter, so it won't give like a huge depth of field. So that is why it's not being so obvious to me. If I come to something like a 60, I hope I'm not modifying. Yeah, yeah. Okay. It's this one, right? Shot 6, take 1. Yeah, this one is. Yeah, and you can see that also there is some sort of weird information in the focal length. Let's take a look at this right here. Now, we can modify this in two ways. We can come here to the focus settings. We can come from manual to whatever we need. Actually, this one in manual could be great. And you can see that right now, this change a lot. This looks way too sharp right now. If I come down here again and visualize the depth of field layers, now you can see that the middle of the stairs are in black, and now I can have this proper green to be in the foreground and blue to be in the background. I can play a little bit with this as well, and you can see that the modification of this is being affected in real time. The other thing that you could do as well is instead of using this effect, you can always play with the draw debug focus plane. The main issue with this one is that you need to activate this plane to see what it's being focus or not. Sometimes this could be like a pain. So you have this ability to see and understand what is being shown and how. Let's take a look at the other one, this one. Let me see if it was this one here. As I can see, for example, this shot is fairly short, and also this character is completely out of focus for me. So what I could do is actually I can try to make sure if this is happening, and you can see that it is in focus. No, it is in focus the middle of his arm. So let's take a look at that. Again, show, we can go here to visualize depth of field layers, and you can see that he is almost green. What I could do is actually to play a little bit back with this character, maybe here. Yeah, something like there, for example. And I'll turn off the debug focus plane. I can see the head of my character is being completely on black, the half of the body. I believe this looks great. You could also play a little bit with the camera and the settings. I don't know why. Oh, I know why. Haha, because I'm being silly here. What you can do is actually to play as the camera, and then you can modify the focal length of the camera in here directly instead of playing with this here. But I believe, yeah, we add here the focal length to modify, to avoid modifying anything. So yeah, this is one of the way that we could solve it. And now when I hit play, I can see my character completely on focus. This one will be like an issue that everyone will have while rendering. I'll talk about this in a minute, but yeah, don't forget about this. This will follow everyone uh, during the rendering times. Okay, excellent. Do we have any questions so far?
Not really, but we can answer now.
None? Okay, so let's talk about rendering itself. We have been talking during the whole day on how should look my image or why should look one way or another. But the real thing is we need to render scene. We have already talked about the movie scene capture. The movie scene capture is like a legacy tool. This is from the, I don't know, matinee days. That was the sequencer back a couple of years ago. I mean, like 3 or 4 years ago, Matinee was the tool make to create cinematics, and right now it's not being deprecated so far, but it's on his way out with a lot of asterisk. It's amazing when you need to create like a easy easy to create video that you can share or send to a client, and you can simply click send render, and that's it, because we'll create like a navi output of your image, and what it will do is actually generate not only the image, but you could also use it to create like custom render passes for creating like a basic post-production project, or you can use to create HDR images of your project. This is cool. This one is cool. Sadly, it doesn't support high resolutions rendering, and also is one of the only options available to create self-contained AVI files or video files on its own. This is like one of the things that I like to point out, because sometimes when we need to send something quickly, what I don't want to have is the hassle of rendering frames, putting all the frames in sequence, and then re-render the whole scene. To be honest, won't take me too much time, but if I can avoid the hassle, I will. And this is cool. Right now, it has like several limitations for what we need far. For example, we need like high resolution images, 4K, 16K, 32, 64K images, and the movie scene capture won't be able to do so. Also, one of the things that we could do is actually create passes of render, but uh, uh, when you see this on difference of what you could do, for example, with the movie render queue, you won't be able to create passes of render or layers of renders. And this is like a big trouble. And of course, one of the things that you won't have is the ability, for example, to set like certain CVARs that will improve the final look of your image. And this is where the movie render queue come into place. So the movie render queue, what it does, it's actually like a manager to render projects. One of the great things is we can add multiple sequence, we can customize the look of each one, we can add different parameters, and of course, we can render this in local or remote. To be honest, when you render this local, it's like you said, okay, let's render, and your computer will start executing the project in Py play in editor, and then it will start to add these frames. Again, when you render this in remote, it's using like a small, like a more intensive use of the engine. It will render everything, but it will use all the resource available of the machine. So yeah, be careful with this one because while you are rendering in local, you can still being able to use the computer, but when you are in remote, render and you can go and have like a new coffee. So let's take a look at one of the benefits of the Moon Render Queue. Luckily, we have anti-aliasing. This is important. We have information about the burn-ins. I don't know. You can add information to what is being rendered. This is when you are working in a project, you need burn-ins to know what date is this shot, when was rendered, what is the version, and etc. etc. Also, we have information about the camera shutter control. You may think, okay, we didn't have that back in, yeah, we do have that control inside the camera, but all the effects that are related, for example, to motion blur, you're not able to see it on the editor, for example, and you're also not able to see it while render inside the movies in capture. So yeah, having the camera shutter control will help us to get this very natural shutter speed that we're looking. Also, we have access to CVARs that will be important when we're working with the project. We can add certain information to um, to the scene to improve the final look. And also we can add game overrides. For example, what happens sometimes you have like a small pop-ups or elements that shouldn't be there or whatever. We have game overrides that help us to set how we want this engine to run. Also, we can create high resolution outputs. You can create like tile counts of image. What it will do is actually take each image and re-render on smaller elements, and then you can combine them. And also you will have all the information about ray tracing. I know so far ray tracing sounds like, but ray tracing also includes path tracing. So fairly important thing to do. Let's take a look at the project back again. Let me change this to use default. And what I want to do is actually go to settings and plugins. In here, we need to make sure that we have two plugins enabled. The first one is the movie render queue. Now you see it. Movie render queue, we have it activated in this project, but then you will see another one that says movie render queue additional passes. This one is on beta, but yeah, I'll activate this. It will add another layer of information and will ask if you want to save everything. I'll say, yeah, I want to save this one that are the shots that we modified. I don't want to change the maps that we have earlier, and it will reopen the project. It shouldn't take like a long time. Some of the benefits that comes from using, that comes from using movie render queue in the industry, it goes from all around. For example, having anti-aliasing will give us like this natural separation in between one element and the next one, even when the colors are way too make so much contrast. This blending between these two elements are awesome. In gaming, having higher cinematic quality, cinematics with less artifacts from motion blur and temporal anti-aliasing. In automotive, I have seen a couple of um, automotive like projects that are awesome. Actually, we have participated in a couple of those. And in Archviz, I don't know if you know an architect that use Unreal to create visualizations. I know they are very happy to use Movie Render Queue because we feel very compelled on the way that it works because it's fairly similar in some things to V-Ray, for example, but in a more efficient way. So I'll jump back to my level. Let's this one where we are, and I'll open the sequencer as well. Excellent. You know that we can see anything because this one has like a fade on top. If we move here, we can see this perfectly, but never mind. And I see this a small like error that we have here. So we can come here to build, and I will build the grass maps and everything. So yeah, that's it. And build the grass maps. Let me see, grass maps, and that's it. I'll save it back again, but we shouldn't have issue with this. So this is what we have on the sequencer. I want to render this. So to change between movie render queue and the scene capture, you will see that right here, you will see these three dots online. We can change from movie scene capture to movie render queue this easily. To enter to the movie render queue, we have to click this icon and you will see that will pop up a new window. This is the main interface of the movie render queue. What do we have here? We have the render queue itself that says, okay, this is the job that you have to create. It is LS Epic B Master, and this job contains all of these shots. This is cool because what I could do is actually said, okay, I don't want to render these ones. I want to render all of these. And it will contain the information that I need. So excellent. It will ask me what settings are you needing for this project. So far it says unsaved config. We will talk about this in a minute. The last one said, okay, where do you want to save this project? That's it. This is all that we have. What we are rendering, which presets are we using, and where do we want to save it? We can add a master sequence as this one, but you can come here and you can look, search, and add shots individually. This is something that sometimes happens when you render like a whole project and then you saw, oh, this is spawning in the wrong sequence. You don't need to render the whole project again, but you can call a single shot if needed. Also, one of the things that happens that is amazing to see, although it's like it goes like in a veil, you don't notice, is you have, when you selected the project, you can see the job name, the name of the sequence, and the map that will be called to render this scene. This is important because one of the things that could happen is you could, even if this is by a mistake, you can call like a different main map and you will get like a very destructive result. So when you see this and you see, okay, this is working perfectly because right now I know this is using this map to render this project. Excellent. I know this is perfect so far. Now, let's go to the settings. This is where everyone gets like a little bit lost. Let's try to break it in parts. I'll close all of this and I'll concentrate first in settings, the output. The output is exactly where we want this to be saved. For example, the output directory. By default, Unreal uses this project directory, the local project directory folder, and it will go to the saved movie renders, and then it will add all the information added here. And also what it will do is actually let's add a new file name format, sequence name, frame number, etc., etc. You can go to the output resolution and you can come here and set 1920 by 1080, but you can go, for example, 2560 by 1440, for example, if I want 2K, or you can go as high as you need. I'll keep it low because I want to see some results right now. Remember when we said that you can change the frame rate anytime you want? Well, you can do it. Remember, this project is in 30 FPS, but you can come here and set, okay, you can go and set the FPS that you need. Obviously, when you go to 60 FPS and all the information, even the animations that you have are 30 FPS, remember that the difference between those frames will be blended between this and the next one. So please be careful with this because sometimes you can get like a little funky information. This is awesome when you are trying to get, for example, slow motion animations. You can render a couple of shots in 240 FPS, and then you can play with that afterwards inside the editing software that you need. Also, you can find like frames, and you can say the handle frame cut where you want it to start the cut of the frames and how many frames you want to achieve. And this is something fairly useful. Sometimes what I do is actually I output every 15 frames of the project so I can take a general look of the editing software that you need. Also, you can find like frames, and you can say the handle frame cut where you want it to start the cut of the frames and how many frames you want to achieve. And this is something fairly useful. Sometimes what I do is actually I output every 15 frames of the project so I can take a general look of how this is looking, if I am missing something. So instead of rendering everything, I could do, okay, render every 15 frames. And I can see all the project, but in a 15 frame time range. And you can also set a custom range playback. You can go and say, okay, no. Instead of going from 0 to, this is 1700, no. What I could do is actually start from 600 to 1200. And I will get these 601 frames in this case. Remember, you are starting at 0, so when you get here, you will have always one frame, one other frame instead. So I'll go here from here to here. So I will leave this as default. This is the output where we want to put the information. Now, the real important thing is what are we exporting? And this is where this element comes here. This is a main category. Right now, and by default, Unreal, what it does is that, okay, I will render this as a JPEG, and this said a JPEG sequence in 8-bit. Okay, not bad. But what happens if I need other things? For example, I want this in PNG, HDR, for example. For that, what we need to do is actually click in this plus setting that we have here, and you will see all information. Actually, this is great because it's already organized for us. It has this setting category, this export category, and this rendering category. I'm talking about exports, and these are the formats that are available for me to render. For example, I have the BMP sequence, EXR sequence, PNG, WAV, if you have some composition of audio, or if you're playing with the meta sounds, for example, you could render this layer alone. You can also find the Apple ProRes 10 to 12 bits, command line encoder, or Final Cut Pro XML exporter. we can work here and I'll try to add, for example, a PNG. I'll go to EXR in a minute, but I'll try to add PNG. So far, you can see that right now, if I select in the JPEG sequence, I don't see any information. When I come to PNG, now I can see that I have the ability to write the alpha channel. This is something that is possible because this is PNG. Also, now, or right now, what I'm telling the engine, without being that my intention is, when you render, please render one image in JPEG and one image in PNG. This is a bad thing because I am actually rendering 2 times this project. So I don't need this JPEG. We can do 2 things. I can disable it just using this toggle. But if you don't need this at all, what you could do is actually use the delete key in the keyboard. So it will go away. And this can happen with everything that you add. For example, if I come here and add a wave audio format file, it's here, but well, I don't need it. I can just delete and that's it. I believe when we talk about format, this is almost it, unless we go to something a little bit more complex. If we have time in the Q&A, we can take a look at that. So let's go to settings, back again, and now we can see that we have settings in this place. And we have a lot of settings. We have, for example, anti-aliasing, burn-in, cameras, color output that you can actually set the movie pipeline color setting. What we said about Okio earlier, you can do it here. We have CVARs, console variables, debug options if we need it, and we have another type of information. We will concentrate in this case in this one, anti-aliasing. So far, when we go here, I don't know if I add, yeah, we add anti-aliasing. Yeah, here it is. So right now, I am rendering this project and I am adding anti-aliasing. I said before that we have the ability to blend a little bit more the edges of the image. For example, if I come down here, for example, something like this, yeah, this one can work. I'll try to create a high-res screenshot of this image with 3 times the resolution. I'll hope nothing breaks. And then I can see my image. But this is what I mean with this. Can you see how this is giving me this jagged curvature here? Although I'm being a little bit unfair because this is not the final resolution. This should look like this on the final res. But even though I can see these lines here, this is happening because the engine doesn't know how to interpolate the information of the elements that are in front or in the back of this element. And how can we set that? Well, we need to add a little bit more information to the engine. This is where we break the engine and ends up being fully real time. What we are going to do here is we have 2 parameters. This one is a spatial sample count, and what it does is actually assume that my image move from his positional place and start to peeping out a little bit from his center to look what is behind or in front of my objects. And then when he understands what's going on, he said, okay, I know how should be this transition or that transition, and we need to add new counts for this. The bad thing about this is every time that I increase this number, for example, I go 2, now the engine needs to render the image twice. So he will render the image in his original position, and then it will go a little bit out there and said, okay, I saw what is there. You need to add many iterations of this. For example, if I want a little bit more information, I can go to something like 6. And now I can say it's in the center and it will go up, down, left, right, and try to go in diagonals as well. You'll start to sample a little bit more of the image. Excellent. This will give me like a huge issue because right now This anti-aliasing does not converge when using a numeral TAA because I am using a temporal AA. This should sum up 64 at the end. I won't get into the math behind this. Remember this number. 6 right now is an issue. This is because so far I am not overriding the anti-aliasing. I am using the TAA, that is the original anti-aliasing that has Unreal Engine. So instead of going instead of using TAA, I will say, okay, you know what? Don't use any kind of of anti-aliasing. Don't use one. I want to calculate my. Now this is an issue because this temporal anti-aliasing use at least 8 samples. If you don't want to use any anti-aliasing at all, you need to add at least 8 samples. Oh, this means that I could go to something like 8 and it will disappear. This is amazing when we have elements that needs to blend perfectly among the image, that we will find like now we have a new parameter that we don't know what it does. This one, the temporal sample count, it's important because what it does is actually sample what it happens between one frame and the other frame. So for example, if I am moving from one side to the other, it needs to know where this object was here and where it was here. And when it moves, it will leave like a small trail. This is what we know as motion blur. So this one is the responsible to have a smooth motion blur. Oof, this is getting complicated now. I could render this like that, perfect. But if I want to see like a perfect motion blur, I need to add samples. 2 samples, it's a bit shy. It will give me like a small information. I will go to something like 4. You know what is the main issue with this modification that we have done so far? Before, we have said, I want my camera to move up, down, left, and it will take 8 samples. It will render the frame 8 times. But now we had said, okay, when you move this element 1 time, now read 2 frames before, 2 frames after, and now show me how this should look. What we have done is multiply this value 4 times. Instead of using 8 samples, now we're needing 32 samples to render the project. And this could add very, very easy. Recommendation, try to go low. Use 4 and 4, for example, it's a good like a starting point. The recommendation is if your camera moves a lot, you need to have a lot of temporal anti-aliasing and a lot of spatial anti-aliasing. This should be like a most balanced scenario. When you have a small camera movement, but your character move a lot, you should have a small spatial sample count, but a lot of temporal sample count. And the third scenario is if you have like a very fast camera, but all your objects are static, then you need to add a lot of spatial count and keep low the temporal sample count. The most important thing is the multiplication between these 2 elements should add at least 8 at the end of the day. This is like the most important thing in this point, okay? Nice. So anti-aliasing also have a little bit more information. We will take a look at that, but I want to do like a small test so far. Maybe let's hit accept. And I don't want to render the whole project. What I want to do is actually to render this set here that is actually, I'm not quite sure, this should be the shot 5. So I'll turn off everything off and I'll keep only the shot 5. And now I will render local. I want to use it local because this is what I want to see. Now you can see that right now my project is being rendered and somebody may be saying, okay, this is crazy. This shouldn't be like this. Well, sometimes happens. This is actually loading up. Hope nothing breaks. Well, actually, I should be closing things so far. Let's start saving things here. Aha. Playback range was 0. Let's take a look at that because I believe, of course,
Yeah.
I did modify this one and didn't untick this. The engine didn't know what to render, so it was expecting like, okay, whatever that frame comes in, I'll render.
So once you're here, what was the difference between local and remote?
Actually, the main difference between these two is that in local, you will use like resource of your machine, but Unreal will be like aware of this, trying not to consume every resources up. When you go to remote, it will try to render with all the resource available. It will render a little bit faster, but you will lose like the ability to
Continue working.
yeah, it will break. Let me see, because so far it's actually in the output. I will do something. Yeah, actually, it's not reading the frames. I'll give him the frames on my own. Okay. Don't worry. Okay. Here I have my render. You can see that so far I have my scene. It's actually rendering. And you can see, for example, the information of what's going on. I can see current sequence, LS Epic B master. I can see how many frames are being rendered. For example, I can see how many time have already been expended, but I can see anything here. What's going on? Well, this one is like an issue that many of you have already uh, gone through. I will go to Windows. I'll go back to my levels. Okay. And you can see that so far my levels have this small blue dot in here. What it's doing in this case is actually this is waiting information to be loaded up. So far, there's nothing to cause them to be here. So what you need to do is to change this streaming method to always loaded. I'll do this. You can see how it's modifying everything. Let's save again the whole project. And now when I come back to render this, I'll go here to this element. I'll check out what it's being rendered. You can see that it loads up everything. This is not what I need. What I need is actually only the shot 5. And let's take a last look at this cinematic. I can see everything is great. Remember, I don't need a JPEG sequence, only the PNG, accept, and then render load. Okay, it's compiling shader. This is always like a good sign. It's compiling shaders, please stand by. We're close. Okay, so here it is. You can see that so far it's doing this 16 count before adding a frame to the project. And you can see that so far it's working fairly good. So I can see here the information on how many frames have been rendered, the elapsed time that has already happened. Remember, this takes in in count all the information about the warming up and everything else. And now we can see, for example, the estimated time rendering. So it doesn't take like way too much time. This is a very simple project that's all, of course, true. And I want to see the results. What I see, it's actually, oh, here we are. You can see the first frame, the first frame that happens here. You'll see like a weird thing happening right now. You see this, where everything looks like moved in a way. This actually my character is out of where it's supposed to be. This happened for a very simple reason. We are calling everything to happen on the same frame. Actually, we're moving the character from one position to another. We're loading the animation in that frame. We are telling exactly in which frame the animation should begin, and this makes everything goes crazy. When happens a little bit of time, and you can see right here, everything is starting to look good again. So you can see that my character is actually behaving correctly. And also, if I take a look, for example, at what looks the shadows on his clothes, it looks great. So I don't have any issue with my rendering. Here, I can start to see some artifacts, and these can be, for example, from the LOD of my foliage. This could be an issue. Okay, don't take this one in accountants because this doesn't count. So, okay, I can see now that this basic configuration works. It's not perfect, but it works. Let's keep working to finish this configuration. For example, we delete everything else. And now let's take a look at this unsaved configuration that we have here. So far, we have added, anti-aliasing, and we have used, for example, an anti-aliasing method. But one of the things that I want to show you is something called TSR, or temporal super resolution. When we add a TSR, you will see that this is actually bigger than the TAA that we have right now. The temporal super resolution is a way that Unreal Engine has to create, for example, new information. It's like the from real to render like a low res image and then upscale it. So yeah, you can modify this like like going here and create new samples for the TSR. I'm sorry. So it's great because you can have like a high res image, but also to do this, my recommendation, if you want to change the anti-aliasing that will save a little bit more time, is just to play with NVIDIA DLSS 3, that it's work perfectly with TSR and you will find no issue at all. You can go here from 1 to 8, for example, 1 to 16. This is bigger than currently have the temporal AA samples. So you can stay up here. And if you want to go higher, what you need to do is to add if temporal AA, and I need to take a look at the samples where it is, add another value, for example, 32. Now that I have done this, I can go here and add 32 samples and I won't have an issue. And I am taking advantage of the TSR that we have available inside the engine. This is one way to do things now and looks awesome. This looks beautiful. Okay, this is one way to do so as well. Either way you choose will be great. Now, let's step up a little bit more because so far I saw something that I didn't like. For example, when I was rendering, I noticed that some elements were popping up the LODs. And for that, what I need to set to the engine is let's add a game override. When you add a game override, what you can say is, for example, I am playing in the movie pipeline game mode, and this will load everything in the most beautiful quality that it has available. For example, we will have cinematic quality settings and it will be checked. At first, you will see the texture streaming will be disabled. You don't want to see texture popping on resolutions in any moments. You will see the LOD zeros enabled all the time. HLODs will be disabled. The hierarchy lots will be disabled. And you will see this is like trying to find the better or the most beautiful quality that is available into the engine. I will lower this one up a little bit. I'll go here and then I will re-render the same shot. Now let's try to see what we got. To be honest, this won't be the last modification that we have done. As you can see, this is going so fast right now. Before we spent like 2 minutes and a half rendering this, but so far it's rendering like 2 times faster. And at the end, you will see that the result will be fairly good as well.
Can you repeat the console command that you had for the temporal?
Sure. I don't know if I'm able to write it here. Yeah. I went to r.temporal AA samplings that you will find down here. Actually, I can send it to you through the Discord channel. Sorry, guys. I wasn't going to talk about TSR here. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have so far. I can see like a couple of messages that are happening. I will talk about this in a minute. These are warnings. Don't worry about this. But yeah, this is because I already told you about this. This is happening just for this. But you can see that so far, as I look at this scene, well, it looks a little bit better. If I take a look at my character, I can see that so far I can come like 3.5 times closer to the image, and you can see the anti-aliasing it's at its minimum. So if we take a look at 100%, you can see that this image is sharp as it needs to be. So this is cool. Yeah, the guards in the background are doing like a small dance. Don't worry about them. It's like a victory dance. Okay. Okay. So we're getting close to a good result. Let's do like the last jump in quality. And this will happen using CVARs. CVARs are console variables that we have available inside the engine. For example, we are using so far like a small representation of what should things look inside Unreal through the viewport, but this is not completely real. I want to add more quality to what I'm seeing. To do so, let's go to this unsaved config, and here, what I will look is something called console variables. I'll see them right here. The CVARs are this command that I just searched a moment ago and added to the engine. I could add them manually, but the main thing about this is that this will be available while the project is open. When I close the project, that will flush all of these CVARs unless I tell the engine when you open these particular projects, apply these CVARs. Can be helpful, but in this case, no, because I want this very high quality image just during the rendering, not while I'm working. I don't need to work in low FPS when I need to create new information. This is only for rendering. So inside CVARs, you will see different options. You will see if you have a CVARs presets created, you can apply this directly and you can add like a list of elements preloaded by default, but you can come here and add each one manually. Oof. Okay, Ramon, this can be a hassle. Let's do this together and you will see that this is awesome. For example, I'll start. You will have all of these. Let me see in the presentation. When you go to the presentation, you will see all of these CVARs right in hand. So please don't worry about this right now. Please focus on what we're talking right now. So I'll come here and I'll open this information. So I'll start with this one. R dot screen percentage. What it does, it's actually allowing me to render this in the same size that I need. For example, we said we need this project at 1920 by 1080. When I add this and I said I want to render this at 100%, I am making sure that this is 1920 by 1080. I can go lower. I can say, okay, 50%, and it will render an image that is like, I don't know what's the half of 19 by 20, but it will render like a quarter size image and then stretch it out. Could be helpful, but that's not what I want. I want to do the opposite. For example, I want to render this at 125 and it will render like a 2400 image and then escalate back to 1920 by 1080. What I will get with that is more dense by pixel and a more refined image. Please try to use this CVAR with a lot of care, because sometimes you said, I want to set this, for example, to 150. 150 is you're rendering 3 times this image. When you said 200, you're rendering a 4K image. So far, when you are using like a full HD quality image, it's not a hassle because 4K is possible. But if you are trying to do like 4K image and you go 200, you're rendering a 16K image. This is crazy. Be careful with this one. And I believe there is a note in the value that I gave you there. So far, we have added one. Let's add a couple of more parameters that are related, for example, to the general quality of the motion blur. This is a value that goes from 0 to 4. So I'll go to 4. Well, it goes from 1 to 4. You can add another one, for example, instead for the motion blur quality, we'll go to the separable that will help us to render like a more quality. The interpolation between these two elements will be a little bit more fluent. I'll add it to 1 to make it happen. Let's add a new one, for example, the depth of field quality. This one is important. Let's add the most highest quality possible. This is 4. Now you can add, sadly, you can add like a bunch of these and then add it, but well, you know the meaning of this. Bloom quality, exactly as we said before. And now the tone mapper quality at its own. The tone mapper quality, believe it or not, you can get a different result of color when the toner mapper quality goes low, because actually the post-processing volume is actually an actor itself, and it can lower its quality to make the render looks or go faster. And now I will add this last one that has to do a little bit with depth of field. Before we have like, before Unreal Engine 5, I mean, we have like this huge list with 20 plus CVARs to use and modified and everything. But so far with these few ones, we can work fairly easy inside the engine. So yeah, let's make this render. You can see that still is taking a little bit of time to achieve. We come from 50 seconds. Remember, we're back at 1 minute 10, but it doesn't take also too much time per se. So this is the most quality that I will be able to extract without going too heavy to the engine. Okay, let's go here. Great. Let's take a look at what we have rendered here. I'll take this one. If I take a look at how even the hair looks in here, that is my most fearsome issue. I can see that even the movement of the hair looks okay, decent. Even the motion blur here feels a little bit natural. Even this happened as well with the hand. So yeah, these C-bars are helping me to achieve like a very simple, good result in my final project. So that's it. We have a couple more C-bars that we can take a look after the break. For example, when we come back, we'll take a look at a couple of these elements that we have here. This is what we can look when things go wrong. For example, when we are using a temporal AA, we want to blend a little bit of this information with the information that we had before, and you can help a little bit with this. Or you have a couple of C-bars related to Lumen to make reflections go to the highest quality because Lumen is able to do so, although it can take a little bit more. And also you can reduce the noise of the reflections inside Lumen. Also, you can modify or play a little bit with the virtual resolution bias of the shadows by adding a little bit more of bias, whether you're talking about directional light or a local light. This is like the most simple CVARs that we could use inside the engine and are pretty the most used ones. To be honest, I don't see any reason why you would want um, another. So this one is like a small heads up that I will give to you. Sometimes when you render, you will get like device 3D disconnector or disable. It's like a timeout that the engine would set. When this happens, most of the times is related to maybe you run out of video memory inside your GPU. Sometimes is because the scene you are using or you are trying to render is too big to fit inside the memory of the GPU itself, as we said before. You need to send information to the GPU and then take it back to add new information, of course. But what happens in this meantime, the way that Unreal reads the information, when it doesn't have this information ready, it said, okay, I don't know what's going on here. I'm out of here. And it closes the process good for good. This is not necessarily bad because he is aware of something funky is going on, but you have a little bit of time to that process happen. The truth is that you have to read the information from your HDD, your hard drive. It needs to go to the RAM, your CPU RAM, and then from your CPU RAM, it goes to the GPU RAM. And this process from taking information from here, storing this one on the RAM, and then putting it back into the GPU and doing this process forth and on, it will take a lot of time. And sometimes you will find this issue. This is a GPU timeout. The easy fix to do this is exactly what I have here. Also, it's like a simple to use thing. What you have to do is to open the the menu, and here what you need to do is actually go to the register editor, and then you will need to find this location that you have here, right click it, and then add this new TDR delay here. So it can take a little bit more of time to wait to the engine to receive this information, and if not, close. We have projects that needed, for example, 240 to open. It's like open and it will take like 3-4 minutes reading information because they were so huge that we didn't have like the proper machine to run these projects, but that's how we solve it. So this is a fairly common issue that you can have. So please take a look. Also, there is like an article inside the documentation of Unreal Engine. I can send it to you in a minute about this, but this is as easy as we said this right here. So yeah, that would be all for me today, guys. I don't know if you have questions or have things to talk about. I have a little bit of things to add to whatever we have been saying during the whole session. There is a lot of information that I want to share with you, but let's take, I don't know, Guzman, 15-minute breaks.
Yeah.
Let's refill the coffee and I'll see you in 15 minutes. Excellent. Okay, I'll pass the recording for you will be a couple of seconds, but we will see you in 15 minutes. Okay, we're recording again this. So I don't know if you guys have any questions or anything to start this portion of the Q&A. If not, trust me, I do have a lot of things to tell you about. So let's see, what do we have?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions about the next few days,
Okay.
but we will see that.
For example,
Like, when are the deliveries?
okay.
What is gonna be the festival? When are we gonna vote?
Excellent. Okay, all of that you will receive with the resource because those needs to be uploaded as soon as we end up this session. But by the end of the day, you will have inside the resource folder, you will receive the credits that should be added into the session, into the final video. So on Thursday, what will happen is during your mentor day class, you will see your projects, you will review it. If you need small modifications, please try to convey and try to solve them. But we have to think on Thursday like our last day because you will all of you will present your projects. Actually, you will post them into your mentor's channel, and your mentor will make a list with all of your names. So you can like make a small votation between all of your projects. These have like a poll with a little bit of rules. This very simple. You will see it in the document. It works pretty well, and I believe it's fairly Solomonic. I believe that could be the way to do so. But yeah, and Thursday you will see which 3 projects will go to the festival, and that will helpful for us because we need those projects for the Friday that is the festival day. For those who don't have the opportunity to present on Friday, don't worry. We can create, for example, afterwards the festival. We can have like a small channel so you can share, all of your creations and talk about that. And also we will have like a event afterward. It's like a small video player where you could see all of your projects and see the whole story being created. So yeah, that's what will happen between these 2 days. On Thursday, you will present all of your projects, finish it, and on Friday, the 3 projects with most votes will be showed in the festival. So that's it.
So Thursday morning, Thursday.
You have the ability to send this, I believe, until Thursday at the end of the day. I believe it's 8 or 10 o'clock. Not quite sure. I will make sure into into the document that we will send you, that you have this very clear. And you will have like a final delivery. It will be delivery 5, where you will send your project without your credits. That's the thing. But as I said, there's nothing different on any aspect. What you need to do is actually send the deliverable 4 would be your final project with your titles, credits in it, and the last deliverable, the one that will be seen in the platform at the end, is the one that doesn't have credits. But that's it. All of that you will see it in the PDF that we will send by the end of the day.
And the stills that they have to send, the 3-5 stills, they should be from the video, or it can be from another angle, or
Actually, we encourage you to create this still from another look that are out of the project. To be honest, one of the things that is amazing about this still is the ability that you will have, the capacity that you will have to, for example, say, okay, I want to show all the work that I have done to show this, and this is one of my stills. So you can see all the work that we have spent creating this world building, this giant pyramid, and all the assets that are in the project. Okay, if that's one of the things that you want to share with us, excellent. If by any meaning, if you said, okay, maybe for me, this is very, very important and you need to see this. Well, if that is the case, don't worry. You can send this to us, and again, we can take a look at that. Please don't let that to be an issue in any case. I want this slide just to go a little bit over here, for example. Okay, that's it. Questions?
I have some questions. I mean, because I have some questions about the post-process volume, but we can finish this and then we can go to the post-process volume, or are you finished with this?
Oh, I have, if there's no other question about the deliverables,
Okay.
sure, we can.
So there is a question, how can we change a mesh with the post-process volume, but just a mesh?
But you want to change the way one element
The
is.
style, yeah. How we see the mesh.
Well, to be honest, and I said this one earlier, I'm not a pro when we talk about post-processing volumes, but when you go here to the post-processing volume, and I'm not quite sure if I don't have one. I believe I don't have one. Yeah. Oh, I'll create one here. Let's go here to the post-processing volume. Excellent. We have this one here. Remember, let's extend this one. Right. And one of the things that the post-processing volume has are materials. So you will see that you have something called post-processing materials. And inside the post-processing materials, what you could do is you can create, for example, an array, and that array can be applied to different elements. For example, I will try to call, for example, this one. This one won't make things like, yeah. This one is not in the post-processing volume main. I don't have one. Let me see if I can. No. Yeah. For example, what you could do is actually do this. This is actually a post-processing volume material that we have inside the engine. And what you could do with this is actually set like an stencil, so you can cut out only the character that you need for the scene, and you can add one specific material only to that asset itself. That should be the way to do it. Okay, that's it. You can also play a little bit with with array. So you can set when you want 1 or 0, and you can keep it or leave it.
Okay. Can you show how to work with two different post-process volume
Sure.
and how they blend?
Okay. So when you have a post-processing volume, this is like a fairly common question. I will put this one aside, and then I'll bring a new one. Maybe let's go to here and create a new one. Post-processing volume comes here. And instead of making this one infinite, because I don't need two infinite post-processing volumes, I will make this one big. So everything that is inside this post-processing volume will get the modifications that we set to it. For example, I'll go inside to see what's going on, but I want to change, for example, the saturation. I will go to the global saturation and I'll play a little bit and add like this fairly wash out texture, and then a little bit of contrast if I'm able to, so I can find like this dark scene at all. So you can see that when I'm outside the volume, I'm back to my normal post-processing volume, but when I get in, you can see that it's now with these modifications all over. So so what it's going on? So far, you will see, let me move slowly. You will see that while I'm moving outwards this volume, maybe not so slow, you see how it's changing. This is because so far I have a priority, and then I have like a blend radius. This blend radius is actually in units, and what it's saying is, okay, when this ends, you will have 100 centimeters to blend between this post-processing volume and the next one, or the one that gets into play. So if I go here to 1, you will see that this transition is like hard. It's boom, boom, because I'm moving from 0 to 100. And if I go to a higher number, for example, 1,000, you will see that this transformation will take a little bit more. It's like coming like this, and then it will start to change until we get to this final result. Something like this, and you will see this transition to go slower until we get to the final result. This is how these two elements work together, and how the priority is actually which one should come at first and which one should come last. This happens when you have a lot of post-processing volumes happening at the same time. For example, when you see like a character and you see he is getting hit or something like that, and you'll see the effect of blood or things like this. These are post-processing volumes that are happening on top of each other. And this is why they should have a priority in all the development. Okay, another question?
Yeah, they are asking for the settings for path tracing in the post-process volume.
That's a good one. Okay, yeah. We talked earlier that post-processing volume doesn't works only with doesn't work only with the information of what it's being shown on the screen. It's also responsible for a lot of performance elements in the project. To this, what I'm going to do, and I'll hope this maybe, I did close that project, yeah. So I'll open a new project and I'll hope everything goes well. So level, that's it. Let me save this. And then we'll go to the create like a box. Give me 2 minutes. This one is a cube. It's always like weird between different programs. The name of everything is quite difficult. So I'll get like something to 5 and 5 and 0.2. Okay, and let's add here like a static mesh, maybe. Let's add this content pack. Yeah, they good. Start your content. Never fails anyone. Marvelous. And now let's go back to props. And this beautiful share will do the trick. Also, maybe I could add some elements afterward, but this can work very good. I'll create a new material in this case. Okay. I'll call it MSF at 3 multiply. No. This one, no. Excellent. And then a scalar parameter that says intensity. Right. Let's give this one a color, a beautiful pink color. This one, and this one. And let's add something like 10 as a value. We'll save it. Let's close it. And let's add this here. You can see so far this share, it's already like completely lit up. Let's add a little bit more complexity to this scene. So for example, I'll take the floor and I'll set this 90 degrees. And then I'll do like a copy of this, something like that. Like this. Yeah, that's it. So what I want to show you here is this thing. You will see like why I do love path tracing so much in a minute. So this is what I have here. Right now, you know that when you add ray tracing to your scene, you are capable of fully ray tracing your scene. You will see that you have this option called path tracing. Path tracing is actually not new. We do have path tracing, I don't know, from a lot of time ago inside the engine. It's, I don't know, maybe 427 maybe. It was quite basic, but yeah, it's path tracing. It's exactly as we have in FTorm or anything like that. The thing is that so far we are not able to configure this the way we would like. For example, I want to control how many passes do I need and everything like that. Maybe even if we I'll add 2 elements here, maybe one sphere here, and let's put this one a bit smaller, something like this, and something like this. And let's add it like a cool material, something like this. Glass, no. Metal, no. This one can work. I'll add this material here. Excellent. And I will modify it just to, I want to roughness, this. I believe we have macro variations. Yeah. I'll break this material a little bit more. I want this, like a very beautiful point. I know it took me more than 2 minutes, but you asked for this. So now path tracing. So far, I have a bunch of elements and I am path tracing the whole scene, but I have nothing to modify these elements. So, but for this, we'll need like post-processing volume. Excellent. You know the drill. We'll make it infinite. And then what I want to look is for the path tracing options. You'll see that you have like few options, but works beautiful. For example, let's go here. Samples per pixel. As you see, when I move, you'll see this small bar moving and progressing throughout the scene. What it's doing is actually sampling a lot of different spaces on the screen, and this is what it's called samples per pixel. So when it reaches 2048 samples, it will stop loading them up and stop rendering. So if I wanted, if my scene, for example, was like very heavy and I need like a easy sample, I can go lower and you can see that this goes fast The main difference here is that I have noise throughout all my scene. Of course, it has less time to render this. Also, when you're working here, you will see that you have an option called denoiser. The denoiser is like, actually it's calling like an algorithm from, I believe this one use Intel's AI algorithm. I may be wrong. I'm sorry. I should actually, I don't know if it says this right here. No, it doesn't say it. I'm not quite sure. But it does is actually apply like a Gaussian filter to my image and try to show the final result. This is how my scene looks without the denoising, and this is how after the denoise is being applied to my scene. This is a process that can take a little bit of time, so please be careful with this. Also, you will find the filter width that will say, for example, how big, I'm sorry, this filter will be affecting the whole scene. You can make it bigger or smaller, and you will see, for example, more sharper detail or a little bit more blurry or aliased sample. So you can play to be honest, 3 is too aggressive. I try to play with 2.2 or 1.8 if the scene needed. But yeah, this is what we do with this. And also, we can find two amazing, two great parameters that are max path exposure that will say, for example, what happens because in this case, we have the ability to overcome the sensor of the camera. And this can bring us like um, fireflies, small dots that are too bright. And you can play with this with a smaller value to avoid these fireflies happening. So far, this is not the case with this material, for example. Maybe we can try to to achieve this in a minute, but you can play with this max path exposure to move it to a safe area. We have to be careful because if we go too low, this threshold with like go and say, okay, I believe this is like noise. This threshold is too high. So if you go too low with this, you will lose information on the lighting. Okay, so please be careful with this one. You can also have the ability to reference a depth of field. Of course, I don't have a camera to have the depth of field here, but you can disable the depth of field because maybe you want to render like a C depth. And this is important because in production, when you are rendering like an image that will take, I'll say an example, 2 minutes to render, what happens if you need to re-render the whole shot again? So sometimes we try to avoid some things like depth of field or maybe the fog or atmosphere effects, and we try to compose those afterwards. And this is what it does. You want to reference the depth of field, you want to be included inside this particular element, or you want to reference the atmosphere. This is something new because before we didn't have the ability to see the exponential height and fog inside the path tracing. So we have to do like a lot of tricks to make something look that good. Let me see if I exponential height and fog. Here it is. Excellent. I'll go to the volumetric to add a little bit of volumetric effects. Nice. And then I'll go big, something like 10. Obviously, this emissive material won't do anything, but when I add a spotlight, maybe this one, for example, let's make this one have volumetrics. Excellent. And then I'll something like 30, for example. Now, what you could see is that this element itself, maybe I want to add, yeah, something too dense. Now you can see that this one has these beautiful volumetrics added to the scene. So now the path tracing to me, it's fairly close to be into a production level render engine. To be honest, we have used it in production so far, but we have to dial a little bit of knobs so it can be fully usable in production. But then I'm missing um, one last parameter. Inside the path and the post-processing volume, you will see inside the path tracing, for example, you will see the max bounces. To be honest, this one is as important as you may imagine. For example, bounces. What I'm saying is, remember, you're path tracing a lot of information from your scene, but that information needs to bounce a lot of times. This is the amount of bounces that you will find. If I go to something like one, what I'm seeing is the light is bouncing from this object here, and once it hits the sphere, it dies. And when it dies, you won't see another bounce of this light. So obviously, this is awfully fast to render, but also it's awfully fast to the eye. It's not, it doesn't go easy on the eye. So if I go with two, you'll see that now I have a bounce. I can see the reflection, the proper reflection of the sphere over this element. But what I'm not able to see is interdiffuse reflections between these two elements, because so far two bounces is not enough. So maybe four, and now I can see the sphere being reflected in the sphere, but we can reach one point where this element disappears. The right number where you can begin to play with is, to be honest, 8. Because when you go to 8, you are now able to go through, for example, proper solid crystals or the glasses, and you're able to see the reflection, the refraction of the light made in there. Also, if you have, for example, something like with thin, translucent glass material, a proper glass material like we saw in material class, you will see the caustics. I'm sorry. And the word is the same in Spanish that is in English, but you will see the caustics going through the material. But yeah, path tracing is awesome. What you need to keep in mind, for example, when you are in production, is this number here. Why this number? Well, for example, let's say if I want like a 512 sample, that's it. And I'll make it full screen just so we can see it. I'm sorry. Okay. This is my image. My final result will look like this. Okay. Excellent. I don't have any issue with this. Maybe it's too low, and trust me, it's way too low for what we want to do. And in the end, but well, I can work with this as a premise. The main issue is that we are not able to send this information just like this outside the engine, because the engine doesn't understand that it needs to do sampling all the time. But we have talked about sampling a minute ago, so let's take a look at that. I'll save this. I'll go back to my level, for example. I don't need to. I don't need to. What I'm going to do, to be honest, is I'm going to create here a camera. So let's do things right here. Let's go here. I'll create a cinematic here, a sequence. This is only for those who want to render their project by using path tracing. This is, to be honest, something that I do not advise by any means. Once said, you are on your own. I'll create one camera here, something like, for example, this. And inside my camera, remember that you are able to modify, for example, this. I want to be something like this. This is my camera. I have, as you can say, I have depth of field here. So what I would like to have in this camera is in the 0, 0, this, and then the transformation, let's add here like a small dot. Let's move to 60, for example, and let's move this camera something like this, something like that. So we can add here another keyframe. And now if I move from here to here, I have this small movement. Okay. I want to render this one with path tracing. But we have the issue that I mentioned before. Let's go to render. I will see the master sequence that we had before, and we have this one. This is the information that it's trying to load up. Don't worry about this because I'm going to get rid of everything. For example, I don't want JPEG, the deferred rendering, I don't need it. I just need the output. Let's configure this for path tracing. So we need two things here, actually three, but let's go with two easily. We need to say to the engine that the method of rendering that we are using is for path tracing. So it needs to look information for a path tracer engine. This is important. Otherwise, it won't do it. It will render with Lumen using the deferred render. So we need to delete the previous one and add here the information. Also, you can reference here the motion blur of the elements. If you have elements movement or things like that, you can have here, and you can even add stencil clip layers where you can separate elements for post-production later on. Now, if I said and I leave things like this, what I will get will be a mess, to be honest. The engine will try to render this one fairly easy, and you can see these results weird. It looks like a Renaissance painting in the meantime. So you can do this, but sadly, the renderer is not doing things as it should. Because, well, it's not sampling the information. Remember when we said we need to sample the things? Well, this happens here. What we have here is exactly the information that I need to give to the engine to sample back again the image as we had before. But what we have to keep in mind is that magic number that we said earlier, we said 512. So what I need to do is to find in my head what is the right amount between one number and the other. So this sampling is the correct one. So what I will do is actually, I'll stop it right here because I believe I don't have any more frames. And maybe what I could do is actually move this to this, okay? So let's sample this. To add samples, we need to go to anti-aliasing. Let's override the anti-aliasing with none. We have seen this before. And what I want to do is actually, let's try something like maybe 224 by 224. What's going on here? Well, if I open my calculator and I multiply these two together, 224 times 2 goes 448. I can go a little bit higher than this. And actually, 275 may work. 275 plus 2, 550. The thing is that I'm multiplying this by this. Remember, these are not adding up. I'm actually 224 plus 224. Try to avoid these kind of mistakes. This could be a very painful mistake at the end of the weekend. So instead of adding up, try to multiply them. Okay, you can go with something simple. You can go with something like, yeah, 60 by 60 is way too much, 20, 10. I will say 15 by 15. Yeah, let's go a little bit lower, but 15 by 25 may work. Actually, what I could do is actually go inverse because I have more spatial samples than temporal, but you will see this later on. And now when I render this, you will see that my image is taking a little bit more of time per frame, but also the image looks way too cleaner than it looked before. And this is because we're rendering this in path tracing, and it's taking 375 samples to render this image. If you want more quality, you can do so, but remember that the idea here is just to try to find first the sampling that you need for your particular scene, and then you try to add those values to whatever you're doing into your project, okay? So I just closed this one up. Let me see where I saved this. Oh, I believe I didn't save them because I'm not smart enough. No, I didn't save it. Let's create like a very small sample here. I'll go from 0 to 10 and let's render this one. I don't know if we have any other questions, Guzman.
Not from now.
Ooh, this is great.
Please help. My case is having a problem with the grain. The image is rendering with grain,
The image is rendering with
and I
grain.
did not activate it.
Can you show me like a screen capture?
Yeah, yes, a screenshot.
Okay. So far it's rendering like the 12 frame. As you can see, like, okay, now it's taking a little bit of time. So be careful with this one. We actually, and this happened to me a lot of times when path tracing just came out, I was dying to use path tracing in a project. And when we have the opportunity, it was like it was crazy. The final result was awesome, but the compositing part of it, it was like a small nightmare. And I will set something for those who wish to use camera shakes. The camera shakes, if they are made procedurally inside Unreal, for example, remember you have to create like a blueprint that you have to add to your project. Please be careful with those ones because when you use them, these elements are timeless, to say it in a manner. They go in a random seed every time. And if you render your set, your camera is moving and it has like its own wiggle depending on what you are doing. But the bad thing about this is if you need, for example, a rendering passes, for example, you need like a depth of field, if you're looking for a materials ID or things like that, this won't coincide. This is this is hard. And what you have to do in that case is bake the animation of the camera. It's not the most practical thing to do. You have to duplicate that. That's what we did in the end. So the movement of the camera was fixed during the whole rendering, and you can reproduce the movement precisely. So please be careful with that if you are trying to do this in the future. So what do we have, Guzman?
There are a lot of questions about the numbers for spatial and temporal anti-aliasing, but there is not a rule. You have to try it in your project.
Yeah,
it depends.
For me, the main recommendation in that case is please go low. 4 and 4. 16 samples is more than enough. And then on top of that, try to evaluate what happens more frequently on your sim. Your camera is moving way faster than your objects. If that is the thing, you should consider going up a little bit with your temporal, with your spatial anti-aliasing. If the elements are moving a lot more than the camera, so you need to consider the temporal one. This is like fairly balanced, and after that, you try to go a little bit here, a little bit there, and try to find this balance for your project. And also, not all your scenes should be the same. For example, what I have in a moving scene like a car chase or something like that will be completely different to what I have, for example, in the simple exterior. Even if they are the same project, okay? That's it.
So this is the grain that
where we have this on
you have it on Discord. Go up, yeah, that one.
Okay. So
I think maybe because it's too dark.
Yeah, well, we have a couple of issues here. Yeah, well, is this? Oh, but what I am seeing here it's completely different to what I'm seeing here. Yeah. I don't know if you can tell, Guzman, but what I can see in this screen is,
Yeah, here it's super dark.
okay, let me see if I can close it and then open back again. I don't know if what was this image made by Gonzalo. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an EXR render from the project
Hmm, okay,
Unresolve.
I'm usually render. I have ray tracing, Tokyo or Aces. Okay, these noise and also the to be honest, this image just in a looks awesome. To be honest, congratulations, looks great. But the main thing that I'm starting to see here, let me go here to this. Yeah. At first, well, what I can see is our image is fairly small. This is one of the things. And two, I have to see, for example, you said that this is ray tracing. If this is ray tracing, well, we may be having like a whole different problem here because the main thing here is that you will need to sample another kind of actors. Ray tracing is different because when you talk about, let's try to see if I can ray trace this in over here. So I'll go here. We go with the post processing. Let's go to global and you'll see Lumen and you can go to ray trace, for example. This is how my scene looked before with ray tracing. So if I go to ray trace, let's go to ray tracing GI and I can add whatever engine do I need. And then in reflections, I need to change. Reflection should be this one. You can see that this reflection looks already great. So I'll go back here and add a small spotlight. Would help here. Okay. You will see, oh, how I missed this awful noise from, I'm kidding. Yeah, this is ray tracing. This noise that you see here, it's actually ray tracing. So, but you need to be careful if you're rendering in ray trace, but sure if I did understand correctly, is you need to be careful with every asset that you are using. It's actually emitting samples and you have to sample from ray tracing from each asset that emits light. For example, if I go here higher to 100, you'll see that, okay, I start to sample a little bit more, but it's not perfect. I still have the noise. But then you'll have to post-processing volume again. And in ray trace, you will have to change your final gather for brute force. And you will see this looks way cleaner. And then you have to reopen the maximum bounces that you have with your light. And then how this element should be baked in. So in this case, I should have like C-vars or a specific C-vars to render one scene that only have a ray tracing on my scene. This is not, well, this is not anymore the most common thing ever. So please, if you're having issue, please let me know. Not quite sure if this is helpful to you, but please be careful with that.
Yeah, someone is asking for a problem with flickering that you solved and you were going to show it or something like that.
Oh yeah, I believe this is from Daria last Friday. We were talking about her project and now and also I wasn't able to find like a way to do it. And to be honest, what the only thing that I did is actually I add a lot of soup sampling, anti-aliasing samplings to this. Actually, what I did is add six temporal anti-aliasing samples to the movie render queue objects.
Yeah.
Oh, Angel is asking like a very good question. For example, he asked, can we have different configs for different shots? Exactly. This is just what I was referring early. So let's take a look at how can we do that. or what can we do with this information? So let's go back to I believe that I have this over here. Let's save this project for now. Here is my project back again. So let's take a look at the cameras sequencer. Excellent. And let's take a look at that. Okay. So if I try to render this, okay, and I'll try to delete, for example, the last one, you'll see that so far I have unsafe config. This is cool because I can come here and configure this one as I need. I can come here and say, no, I need this as an EXR, will be like no compression with multi-layers, and I can add a lot of information right here. So I can come here, add a lot of configuration. Remember, you have CVARs, you have like games override, you have everything here. The good thing about this, if I don't want to keep doing this over and over and over, what I could do with this is create something called a preset. And then the preset, you can come here and save it, save as preset, I'm sorry, and it will ask you, where do you want to save it? So I'll go to this folder, the one that says 10 MRQ, and you'll see pending movie pipeline primary config. What it's doing is actually saving all the information that we have set earlier. And this is cool because right now, if I need this configuration once again, I'll have it right at the tip of my finger. But as you can see, you have like a high Epic Bootcamp configuration and you have a low Epic Bootcamp configuration. So what I did is, or what I could do is actually, I could load this one and you will see that all the information is already loaded to me. You can see that what I did is actually turn off PNG and enable EXR. And when I do this, everything will be applied to this project. When you see to settings, you will see that Okay. Apparently, I'm not able to select 3 helicopters in a row. This is great right now. Okay, one asset rock with, I don't know, nanite maybe. Let's get something weird, nanite. This one, for example, I'll bring this one on nanite and click and drag. Click and drag. Okay, so this is my asset. It's actually downloading right now. So let's give it a second. And you'll see that right now it doesn't look that bad, but also doesn't look beautiful as you expect from nanite. But yeah, it's loading the final quality. And now let's take a look at this. Let me take a look at my directional light so far. Yeah, and you can see it looks and works perfectly. But the main thing here is this. I'm actually saying this asset, and you can see that all the shadows respect the shape of this element. Where is the main problem here? When you're working or you're trying to cast ray traced shadows, we mentioned this because the ray traced shadows still has a little bit more quality than the virtual shadow maps. The main issue with that is that the engine is not able to read nanite meshes with ray traced shadows. And what we are seeing right here is just, let's take a look at this. As you can see on this mesh, we have something called nanite fallback. This is one method that the engine uses just to render the scene in low quality. Happens when you go, for example, with ray trace or path trace, the engine, instead of showing us the full, highly dense triangle the mesh, it will show me only this fallback. So yeah, this is the main issue. To solve it in the directional light, what you will do is you can search for ray trace, and where it says cast ray traced shadows, you can come here and set disable. That's it. And this is so obvious that when you come here, for example, and you set go with path tracing, you'll see that the result that we see in the screen, we would expect this to be a lot more beautiful, but no, it's not. It's actually looking at the low res mesh that path tracing can see or ray tracing can see, but Lumen is a little bit more custom to work with nanite hand to hand. Excellent. Who else is there? Questions?
No one.
Oh, no one is having issues by rendering their projects.
Everyone is working.
I'm happy to hear about that.
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead. Shoot. Translucent 3. Okay. Okay. Ooh, that one's very good. Okay, let's take a look because I'm saying one that is fairly important to answer that it has to do with the hair of the metahumans. So I'll go first with that one, Jordan. Let's take a look at what's going on. And to be honest, guys, I'll pause a moment the project. I will reopen my project so The sequencer works perfect back again. If you can give me 1 minute, I can show this to you. Need 1 minute. Bias. Yeah. Nanite doesn't work with ray tracing shadows, is the other way around. Uh, Ray tracing shadow doesn't work with nanite meshes. What it does is able to look at the fallback represented by those meshes. The good thing about that is, for example, the creation of the nanite meshes is automatic, made by the engine. So even that, if even the asset that we saw is way too low poly, you can go there and increase, like, I want this fallback mesh a little bit more detailed. You can do this, but the engine takes all of the hard work and do it by us. So please don't worry about that. While we are at MetaHuman, can you show how we fix bright gray hair? I don't know. Can you show? Can you share me like a small screenshot? It's hard
Yeah.
to diagnose the patient without at least a picture. Okay, so I'm reopening the project. Sorry, guys, I just have to reopen a new version of the project so we don't have issue with the sequencer itself. 1 sec. Okay. I'll go back 2 hours in. Right. Now let's take a look. To sequencer. And let's take a look at this sequencer. Okay, here we are. Well, the same thing that happened earlier. I'll build the landscape, don't worry, and I'll build the grass. That's it. Let's save everything up, no issues, and I can see my project. So let's take a look at this from here, and let's find one shot where my MetaHuman does his thing, okay? So we'll move. I believe this is pretty easy to find. Is this shot over here, and I can see like the hair moving and everything happening in that particular shot. So what I will do is actually I will jump to that shot itself. I believe it's this one, and this is what's happening. I'm going to open this one a little bit more so we can see what's going on here. Here we have my character, but as you can see right now, this shot, this element that is here, it's happening all in one shot. Actually, what I'm doing is calling the animation, the camera and the camera component in this shot. This is one issue here. Also, as you can see, we have a blueprint new camera shake in this as well. Why is this so important, at least for me? We're actually telling the engine that when it comes here, you can see like spawn everything here. And when it does, it jumps from one side to another. And this is because he's trying to do everything in the same frame. And what I mean is, it's actually trying to put the camera shake, the character, the animation of the character, everything. So I'll come back one bit, and now I'll take a look. And this is why I don't like to work in this particular way, because if I do work with shot by shot text, I do love to have, for example, the animations in the exact same shot that I'm working with, because otherwise I will find, for example, something like that. And you see this? Okay. What I can do, and you can see that Seneca, what it's doing, it's moving from one side to another. He is in one place, in one moment, and then he's moving towards where it needs. So what I want to do is actually to move this one a little bit earlier, and I can see like this one is here, like, I don't know how many frames I have moved this one here, but then I want to move this a little bit here, for example. So when I see in this shot, this particular shot that I have here, my character has already been there before it happens. It's hard to see when you have two different shots. What I could do is actually put this one in here. So let me see if I can find how to do this. Shot, I believe it's this one, shot 5. Yeah. Seneca is this one. Okay. Okay, you can see that we have one character over there and I have one character here. What I can do is actually, I can move this one up to here, for example, and I have the same character, what I need, but I need to make, for example, this character to move a little bit earlier. So when this happens, he's already in the same place where it needs. Oh, I break it. I didn't want to break you, my good friend. Let me see. This is why I try to make everything on the same shot. I have this here. I have this here. Okay. So let's take body and face. Yeah, I believe I didn't copy the body animation. I won't believe if I'm not able to do this from here. This is something that also can happen to you. Your metahumans may be able to lose the head. Maybe it's easy for me. I don't want to do this in this way. Okay, guys, I won't try to fix this shot. I will make a new one. I believe this will be easy for me to show in the time that we have, that is not so much. So let's go to create like a cinematic shot. Sequence. Excellent. This is, I'll create like, I'll find out, I'm sorry, like this character. And a human, so-called Seneca, I'll add it here. Okay, this is this is the first thing that I see here that I don't like. Let's take him like LOD -1 to this character. Yeah. So this is the first thing that I try to always do. I'm not saying about deleting the control break. What I mean is I'll try to add in the shot, the shot that maybe I'll try to add the characters and the camera. All that has to be with animation. And this comes with a very compelling reason. If right now I can take this body track and add, for example, any animation, I don't know if I can take this, oh, this is fairly short. Let me see if I can track like a longer animation. Maybe this one can work, maybe. Yeah. Wherever he is. Hello? Here it is. So this is what's going on here. Right now, this character, it's actually from here, my good friend. Move him a little bit right here. So what is going on, he start to appears and move in one frame, one single frame. But instead of doing this, what I want to do is, instead of here, try to start 20 frames earlier. For example, I don't care, 20 frames earlier. And then let's try to add a camera here. So let's go here and let's see where is my friend, my good friend here. Let's focus only on him. And here we are. So now if I come down here, you will see that the camera and the character, they are already on the place after or before everything happens. So let's configure this element with the details and let's focus whatever I need. Something like, okay, something like this can be. And now my camera is being spawned. What I can do is actually I could spawn as well these characters, so everything will be contained in this scene. But the good thing is my character will already be happening or existing before the camera reaches this place. So when I render this sequence, for example, I don't care this information. For example, I can come here and set, let's add some anti-aliasing, and you will see that you have these parameters here. I want to set, okay, you can render warm-up count and you can set how many frames you need to, and I will say, for example, 15 frames, for example, render warm-up count. This is, you will render the frames before, you can set no, but you can also set how many frames you want the engine to warm up. You can go to 200. And in this case, what I'm doing here is saying render warm-up, use camera cut, I'm sorry, for warm-up. So now when I render, he will take fully consideration of what we said before. You can see that he is actually moving and the hair is perfect. Remember, I didn't load all the levels before. What I did here is this example, and to reload it. But in this case, you can see that the hair of the character is already in place, and I don't have that 2 or 3 frames weird at the beginning. And the main reason is what we have done here. We make this asset to appear earlier. And when you call the shot, you said, okay, you know this shot, think of this shot 15 frame before, and then start on the frame 0 with this. And you can do this. And as you can see, this is actually like a new sequence that we have. And that sequence, you can add it to whatever you want. And the good thing is, if you have every sequence organized in that manner, I mean, camera, characters, and those animations starting a little bit before, yeah, you will get this perfect result where everything moves like it's like it was like that before. Also, if you're having issues, for example, with the hair, I don't know, you may have to, even if
there is a one here that is not reflecting in the transparent glass, in the translucent glass. It's reflecting in the mirror, but not in the in the translucent glass.
The character?
The hair.
Ooh,
Maybe it's because this is translucent, and this is translucent too. Something happening with those.
I don't know. Mm, actually, I do have like a small idea of what could be. What I would do is actually try to create or add add to that glass that you have there, add the same mirror-like surface that you have there, and let's see if he is able to render it, because otherwise seems to be a little bit off to me that kind. And okay, could you show, for example, could you show the settings when rendering the hair again? Oh, sure, but it doesn't have to do, for example, with the configuration. Oh, I did understand the question. The first thing is remember to make sure you have handle frames before and you know the number. Otherwise, you will find like a huge list of warnings. It's normal, but when you render, if you come here and set to anti-aliasing, you want to do is actually use Camera Cut for warm up to warm up the render. And also what you want to do is actually add a warm up count. This render warm up count is the amount of frame that you leave earlier to this sequence. I'm reading that question, but I don't have the answer, Hamish. Rumor control question. We will have
questions about that.
Yeah, well, to be honest, we do have the answer, but David will make it tomorrow a small announcement on that. But to be honest, try to work as the deliverables are for the Thursday, because this is important for us and for you to be presented on the festival. So please try not to lowball a little bit the final deliverable, okay? So do we have a last minute? Ooh,
The one with the white hair, like the shiny hair.
yeah, well, you will have to work with the material, because in this case, and it's nothing wrong with the hair because it looks great, but the main thing is that it's reflecting too much light. It's like a very, I don't know what would be the word in English, that is like very crispy, curly, the beard. So it reflects every position of the light. If you have a light, and this is something that could be helpful, I don't know, maybe. Let me see if I can show it to you very quickly. If maybe we add here like rec light. Okay, let me add some rec light here. You will see that here my beard and everything looks like, yeah, a little bit white. You see, like this gray hair. Well, this character indeed has gray hair, but you see that we have like this very white accent there. So please take a look at your image, that your specular scale. Okay, you can play a little bit with that. Ooh, but it won't affect on the hair. Excellent. So yeah, but luck, you will have to go to the material asset itself and modify. You will have to go with the hair and material itself and modify. So be careful with that. So guys, if we don't have another question, when loading an animation on a skeletal mesh in sequencer, we see the animation, but the capsule stays in place. How the character could move as animated? You lost me in the middle of the question.
Yeah.
We see the animation, but the capsule stays in place.
software?
Oh, well, if the character is in place, maybe you
Ah.
download like a stay in place animation that
And you have
is
to keyframe it.
exactly that is fairly common where you have like a character walking on the same place all the time. But what you have to do, and this is fairly common, is you have to add the transform point to start moving from one point to the next one.
This question is like,
This is hard. Iván. What parameters in post could increase realism and reduce CG look? To be honest, it's a little bit of everything. You have to think, for example, I mean, we're not only talking about the assets itself, because I believe that with all the assets that you have available, you can create like a fairly good picture. But in this case, you will have to start thinking in everything. For example, camera. I believe, okay, I need to create like a camera in this point. And after I do have the camera here, let's see, this is starting to go a little bit sluggish. Maybe I shouldn't use so many metahumans in this case. Let's close this for a minute. Okay. So let's see if I can pilot this one here. Forget about the floating head. I'm just saying this one here. So you start to think not only on that, you need to think, for example, in the camera itself. And then you go, okay, which kind of camera I will use for this? Maybe a DSLR full frame. But when you're talking about the full frame, I want to play with, I don't know, the focal length, and I will go with an 80 millimeters. But if you go with an 80 millimeters, what I will get? Well, a lot of depth of field, but I'm getting the depth of field of my character. No, maybe I want to add this to, let's put it here to see. Okay, something like that. Okay, now let's see the draw default plane. Perfect. You can see this cinematic depth of field. Maybe this one is too much because I wouldn't capture anyone with 2.8 at this distance, but something like this. And then you start to play a little bit more. Okay, how I want to light. This is too much, and you have a camera. You can start playing with whatever you need. For example, if you go a little bit down here, you can start like, okay, let's add. Oh, actually, what I will do is actually apply this, take out this, and this is exposure. This is automatic, right? Yeah, this is why I don't like it. Let's start play a little bit more with the lighting itself. So you can, and you have all the tools that you need to do so. I will play a lot with this post-processing volume material because, for example, I do like this soft light that I have right now, but I can start playing with, remember our rec light that we have before, for example, this one. Then let's try to play, this one is too strong, to add like a key light for this character. Now, that's it. If you need a little bit more help, you can keep this one locked in. This one. And after that, what I will do is play, for example, with the post-processing volume. And then I will try to play a little bit with color, and you have to start to find, for example, the meaning of what you are looking for, but try to forget a little bit about this and start playing a little bit more with the asset and the possibilities. You will find like beautiful results that will look fairly like, I will say gaming, because we have an educated eye with that, but you will find like even something like perfectly real. It's beautiful to see that movie. And when you take in consideration why this movie looks like this, because everything is on scale, you can see all the information on the materials, and it feels like a Lego set alive, and it's great. It's great in general. for example, something like this, and then you can go here and pilot back to see how this character looks. And these start to get a little bit of the feeling of what we are looking right here. A lot of people here in the studio. Yeah. I have a blur composition with a few, but after render, I have software is keep it up. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Have a nice
See you tomorrow.
afternoon.